Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Janet Mindes. I'm a colleague of our speaker tonight, Dr. Ailey Cohen, and like her, an editor and author of a volume in the Dr. Andrew Weil Integrative Medicine Library of Oxford University Press. I'll be moderating her presentation tonight. Thank you all for attending. Some of you may have been here for a talk that I and some colleagues gave on another integrative medicine topic some weeks ago. So Dr. Cohen and I'm sure she'll thank personally, but we're grateful to have the JCC hear from people in that publication effort again. Our environment has changed dramatically in recent decades. Our short and long-term chemical burden has been increasing like never before. Even with COVID, people started using a lot of chemical disinfectants. That's added to the chemical burden. Tonight, Dr. Cohen will explain that this increasing threat to our health is a problem that everybody really should pay attention to, and will teach us how to protect ourselves with easy to implement sensible measures based on her wonderful recent book with Dr. Frederick Fumsal, PhD. The book is called Non-Toxic: Living Healthy in a Chemical World. It's a volume in Dr. Andrew Weil's Healthy Living Guides, which is a companion Oxford University Press series for the lay public, specifically designed for lay people. Dr. Ailey Cohen is a triple board certified doctor in internal medicine, rheumatology, and integrative medicine, and is trained in environmental health. She is an innovative medical educator, author, and advocate in private practice. Dr. Cohen received her undergraduate degree from the University of Pennsylvania, her MD from Hahnemann University Hospital School of Medicine in Philadelphia, and completed her training at the Beth Israel Center and Montefiore Hospital, Albert Einstein University Hospital, excuse me, in New York City, and also completed an integrative medicine residency program with the Andrew Weil Center for Integrative Medicine at the University of Arizona School of Medicine. That program has been growing, and we learned, some of us learned recently, they've broken ground on new buildings there. So this bringing integrative medicine into medical training is only becoming more important. Just a quick mention of Dr. Cohen's co-author, Dr. Fumsal. I want to mention that he is a renowned professor of neuro and reproductive biology emeritus, who has published more than 140 articles specifically on endocrine disrupting chemicals. You'll hear more about those, and has presented at hearings in the US Congress, elsewhere in the US and abroad. He's a fellow of the American Association of the Advancement of Science. So Dr. Fumsal is a distinguished scientist in the area of chemical burden and how it impacts our health. So first, Dr. Cohen will present her slide lecture for approximately 45 minutes, and then she'll take your questions. Please post them via the chat function in Zoom. I'll read them out loud, and she will answer them, and maybe I'll be asking some follow-up questions as needed. Dr. Cohen.
Thank you, everyone, for being here on this evening. And also thank you for our hosts, my host, our host, and also Janet, of course, my colleague, for her beautiful introduction. I'm going to share my screen now. And let's see. Let's see, play from start. Now, can you see everything? We're good? Okay, good, because I'm not great with technology. Okay. So this talk, tends to, bring up some anxiety with folks, just even from the conversation of chemicals, because we hear a lot of sound bites in television. The goal for this talk, really, just to get it out of the way, is to empower people. I always try to empower listeners, to know the problems, to understand the problems, and then to also know the solutions. And I don't tend to post or teach or do a lot if I can't seem to give some solution. So I'm going to get right, started. A lot of slides here, but they move quickly. And I hope you'll have some great takeaways from this presentation. So this was actually a slide I put in, before COVID. So you can imagine just the exponential value of this image, since COVID. This was just meant to describe chemical exposures, even radiation exposures, which I'll get into as well, but it had no concept of COVID at this time. And so it really makes us feel like this is the way we're living, or should be living, if we're going to stay safe. There's an argument to this, but to be honest with you, my argument is we live in this world, we have to manage this world. And so a lot of what I teach is how to actually manage in a world that you can't always fix the problems overnight, certainly not from a legislative point of view. So I want to mention this book. Janet, thank you so much for mentioning it as well. This is the Consumer Guide series. Dr. Weil has an academic series, and this is the Consumer Guide series, which all of us write within this wonderful series. And the reason I want to mention it is because I'm not going to be able to cover all the topics. This is the table of contents, just to give people an idea of how deep we do go, even at the consumer level, with a whole chapter on, how to prepare for pregnancy for people who, one day may want to have kids, or, who are actively trying or currently pregnant. So we get into medications in one chapter, which are just the common everyday chemicals that could be pharmaceuticals, and really the pros and cons. I'm not anti-medicine, of course, as a rheumatologist. I am more in the integrative arena, which is to not use them reflexively and to understand some of the pros and cons of the more common medicines, which are in fact chemicals too. So you can see there's a much deeper dive in the appendix. I put in things like travel guide, travel tips, gym tips, things that I just discover walking through this world of chemical exposure and what to do to reduce that toxic burden. So I want to start by saying, when I think about chemicals and what I teach high school and college students, is really what I'm thinking is, what do we put in, on, and around our bodies? So in our bodies, food, whether it be healthy or technically unhealthy, with chemicals, preservatives, but even like, supplements, vitamins, there are contaminants in many supplements, heavy metals that are absorbed from the soil that those plants overseas are grown in. There are, chemicals that are put onto medications and vitamins to give them coatings, to give them color, to make them dissolve slower. So there's lots of different things that you need to consider when you think about in, and including, things we consider healthy, like, red wine or, fruits and vegetables. There's chemicals, of course, and pesticides on many of our fruits and vegetables. When I think of on, of course, you would think, makeup, personal care products, but things like, contact lens solution, whether it's good or bad, mouthwash, things that only touch our bodies for just a brief moment, and the burden of chemicals and personal care products keeps on growing as the industry grows and the marketing grows. So it's really going to become an issue if we don't teach our kids and our fellow adults and ourselves how to look these products up, which we'll get into. And when I think of around, I think about a lot of aerosolized chemicals, surface cleaning products that actually aerate off into the air we breathe, and then they fall to the ground, to the surfaces in our homes, because those chemicals don't just disappear. They find their way into house dust. Candles are very much the same. Synthetic candles, when they burn, they certainly burn those chemicals off into the air, but then they find their way back onto surfaces and even into our lungs, and also onto our skin, into our pets' paws and on the floors. So, on, in, and around really implies what is around us airwise, also, the things we actively bring into our home, such as these plug-in air fresheners, and even things like, toilet cleaners or drain cleaners. These things go down the drain and they're around us. We handle them with our hands, and so they can get into our environment. So when I was putting together a TED Talk, I really sat there and thought about, if you have so many exposures in a day, and I chose, I did a little experiment with friends and kind of added up 47 exposures in a day, and 300-400 in a week. And then I multiplied that by, a month, and then 12 months, and then a year, and then a decade. And it added up to somewhere around 170,000 exposures to whatever I'm putting on, in, and around my body in a decade. And I was trying to really give this image that one or two exposures doesn't seem to mean a lot, but they mean a lot cumulatively. And that's what we're kind of seeing in the science, is that you can have a very, very low exposure to something that is parts per million, parts per trillion. But when you're getting, exposure every day to those parts per trillion, they're going to start to add up. And of course, we live in a very industrial world. So we have air pollution issues, things that we can't always control. I love the Serenity Prayer. It's one of my favorite prayers, and it's in actually non-toxic. As the first kind of an intro into the book, is that we want to be able to control what we can control, and to know the difference between what we can and can't control. And I think that's really important, because I don't want people to waste their energy on things that they can't make a difference in their lives with, but to really focus on the things that are very doable. And we will be surprised, I hope your audience is surprised, how much we can actually do to reduce the body burden in our blood, our urine, breast milk, to really reduce those chemical exposures because of the half-lives, but also because of what we do to take them out of our life and our daily experience. So I wanted to just give folks an idea of what environmental health is by definition. Environmental health is pretty much anything in our environment that affects our bodies, our health. And so it doesn't just stick with chemicals, which you would think is the obvious conversation here, but it also includes our drinking water, which people don't really think about, which has become my biggest talk, actually. Soup to nuts of understanding our water systems, whether it's municipal or it's well, and how to carry water and clean water, and really what are the issues, regulatory issues. But we also have, chemicals that are in the air, as you can see from pollution and combustion and manufacturing. We have radiation and all of the different, technologies that now surround us, because we love our tech stuff, but we have to know that radiation can in fact make a difference in our health, and that there are very simple ways to reduce those exposures. We don't think often about food packaging. We think about food and food chemicals, but we don't often think about the food packaging that they are resting in, whether they're hot filled drinks into plastic containers, and then you just end up in our store refrigerator. So we want to start to think about those exposures too, and how to reduce that as much as we can, because of course we can't always control food packaging unless, of course, we're growing our own food. Materials like couches often have flame retardants from 1975. So we have a whole section in the book talking about that horrendous story. And it actually was broken by the Chicago Tribune, which got a Pulitzer Prize for their coverage of the flame retardant story that began in the 1970s, and added flame retardant chemicals to pretty much all home furnishings. And how that was eventually overturned and removed, but it's voluntary whether companies do that with their furniture, whether they take those chemicals out. So environmental health is anything that affects human health. And I will throw in light pollution. We know that synthetic light pollution is interesting and can affect mood and anxiety, circadian rhythms. We know that noise pollution, people who live near airports and loud environments in cities, tend to have higher rates of blood pressure and anxiety. So there's a lot of connections to those type of exposures as well that we don't often think about. Now, when we develop disease, if we develop disease, it's not to say that it's entirely environmental exposures that are the cause. We know that there's this dance, this very intricate dance between our genetics that we are given, our lifestyle, what we choose to eat, what we choose to do with our sleep, what we do with exercise, and then this environmental exposure. So it's a dance between environment, lifestyle, and genetics. The question really is, can we, using the concept of exposomics, which is the ability to possibly reduce the expression of harmful genes by affecting our lifestyle? In other words, can lifestyle and environmental exposures be managed in such a way where they can keep those maybe harmful genes from being expressed? And there is plenty of evidence to show that that is true. So, I think that gives all of us a lot of, relief to know that we have control over our genes, and there's plenty of science to support that. And this is just the information to help with that one component of a disease development or disease risk. So most of the work that's been done in terms of environmental health and chemicals really is based on the human endocrine system. And this was because this is where research began when they were looking at hormones in animal studies. And it was actually a haphazard study that went wrong, where there was a problem with the results when there was a mouse study, and I think it was contamination of the plastic water feeders that was discovered to be the culprit, because plastics from the water feeder actually contributed to the hormone levels. And I wish I was more specific on it, but it's really one of those curious mishaps that really started to make very intellectual, intelligent researchers question whether or not exposures at very low levels, similar to the way hormones are released in the human body at very, very low levels to do a whole host of physiologic activity, whether or not those chemicals could in fact be similar, could mimic the very sensitive, very vulnerable release of hormones in the human body. And in fact, that is what came to pass, which was that there are certain chemicals, and we now know up to about 1,000 endocrine disrupting chemicals based on the research from these early years, about 25 to 30 years ago. What's since come from this information is just a vast amount of international information from, position statements from the World Health Organization, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the Endocrine Society, the American Academy of Reproductive Medicine, just an enormous body of medical literature that has been published supporting the concept that environmental chemicals from food, from contaminants in water, from certain chemicals in the air, from non-stick, stain guard, Gore-Tex, rain, waterproofing chemicals, those are the perfluoroalkyls, have effects on the human body that have now been figured out, and not just in animal studies, but in human studies. So there are epidemiologic studies also showing relationships to the development of behavioral problems in children, such as phthalates, not just physical problems of, male infant genitalia changes amongst them. So we have animal, we have human studies, and so this has become quite an important topic. The Time magazine article and the cover was really quite amazing. This is October, I think, of 2010. Also showed that the in utero environment is not as protective as we think or hope, and that many of these chemicals actually can cross through the placenta, because again, these are industrialized chemicals that have never been tested for safety or toxicity in humans before going into the products we all love, and that these chemicals can be found in cord blood, can cross the placenta, and so those exposures can in fact have effects on a fetus, and therefore affect changes for the rest of fetal life and into a young adulthood and adulthood. Another concept that's very important is not just, in utero exposure during baby growth, fetal growth, is that also there's these other periods that when hormones are actually quite active, they're being created, they're being broken down, receptors are developing, they go up and down based on how much hormone is going to be caught. With that messaging, because hormones are signalers, they're messaging signalers, they're proteins. These other periods of hormone changes include not just prenatal, but also toddler years and infant years, puberty, of course. I have 2 teenagers right now. So yeah, puberty and pregnancy, of course. And then of course, menopause, which people don't often think of that as a sort of a big period of hormonal change, but it's not growth of hormones or elevation. It's really change that's really considered making this a vulnerable time period. So we have to think about these areas. I do a lot of work with teenagers, and I think that's, just a wonderful demographic to target, given that teenagers, of course, use the most products, personal care products, than any other demographic in a 24-hour period. Teenagers are very tech savvy and very smart. They want to learn about their bodies. They're very self-conscious. They're very interested in personal care products and cosmetics. They may one day have children. So this is a very good opportunity to get into their brains about, what they put in on and around their bodies, and to empower them as they move forward. So that just happens to be the area that I'm now focused on in a big way. And just to hit home on the concept of in utero exposures, this is a quote from Irva Hertz-Picciata, who's wonderful and runs a very important program out at UC Davis. And she writes, or her quote is that I love, is neurons are being formed at a rate of 250,000 per minute on average over the course of a pregnancy. And that's a lot of opportunity for things to go awry. And that is true. We sort of take for granted that the building of neurons and this many in 1 minute, will go smoothly. But the environment has to be as clean as possible. And we see that now with the data. Okay. Okay. So I think this is moving slower than Okay, here we go. Another point to make about the vulnerability of pregnancy is that when a pregnant woman is exposed to anything, be it light, be it noise, be it stress, be it healthy food, be it unhealthy food, 3 generations are being affected at once. The mother, the fetus, as you would imagine, but people don't often think that the fetus actually is born with reproductive cells that can be affected by those exposures. Certainly women are born with all of the eggs that they're ever going to have when they want to have children. And there are very important early cell structures and the development of, genitalia for boys that are very, very sensitive to hormonal exposure and also these environmental chemicals potentially as well. So when we think of that, we need to think of 3 generations, not just one, when there is an exposure to or for around a pregnant woman. Children are certainly vulnerable in their own right. Pound for pound, they have greater exposure just because of the volume of air they breathe per body mass index. They're close to the ground. They touch a lot. They put things in their mouths. Often dust is a very large source of contaminants that make their way from products and cleaning products and air products into a home. It ends up in dust. They have a very minimal variety in their diet because diet really plays a key role, which we'll talk about in reducing some of the harm from these chemicals. So if their diet is so narrow, they're going to have less chance to actually offset some of those exposure issues. Their metabolism is still immature. Their liver doesn't quite work at the level of an adult to get rid of some of the chemicals that we now know can be broken down by the adult liver, and they're continuously developing. And they have more years of future life ahead of them in terms of exposures, as opposed to maybe some of us whose exposure started after the 1960s, 50s, 70s, even in the food industry with all of the junk food I grew up on. It's pretty remarkable. So again, I go after teenagers as much as I can. I feel like they're the right demographic. I feel like if you get their ear, it's just gold. And I also know that they want this information, having done pilot projects, which became the basis of the TED Talk that I did, which you can find on YouTube. But it is really focusing on the data that was collected at a local high school here in Princeton, New Jersey, and showing that people in this age group, this demographic, want this information. I wanted to show this, showing the hormonal explosion of this generation, of this demographic. And the fact that they just love their products. We all kind of did, I think back then I did. It's just an exploration of what to put on your body and how to look cute and smart and cool. And everyone's sort of self-conscious, but it's just such a wonderful window to get in there to teach this kind of information. I also wanted to put a slide in showing breast cancer environmental risk, knowing that we now have enough evidence to show known risks. On the left here, we know hormone replacement can have some risk. Certainly now in more modern times, the dosing has been drastically reduced in terms of any harmful hormones or unbalanced estrogen without progesterone. We know that certain medications back in the 70s, like DES, were certainly linked to higher rates of breast cancer, and even in the offspring of those exposed and given medicines like DES. Radiation can certainly have a lot to do with breast cancer development, certainly when phones are carried right on the breast. Tobacco smoke, any type, first, second, and third hand smoke. Alcohol has been linked to higher rates of breast cancer, but also occupational exposures that we don't often think about. Manicurists, people who work in the hospitals have higher, certain groups have higher rates of breast cancer given their exposures to various chemicals, cleaning products, air quality issues, and even shift workers. So those are some known risks. But what's interesting on the right, the suspected risks, that data has been getting more and more increased over the years in terms of these environmental chemicals like BPA, phthalates, triclosan, which is antibacterial chemicals that are known endocrine disruptors, and certainly pesticides, but also the non-stick chemicals and the perfluoroalkyls. So with all of this horrible stuff that I just presented, what can we do about it? And that's where I want to turn now, is to sort of give some ideas on how to reduce those exposures and not let them get into our body as much as we can. I start with diet because we all need to eat, and eating is a good place to start because we always want to choose better. These beautiful vegetables and fruit look awesome, but I will say that in the book that I'm writing now for a year and a half from now, I really focus and emphasize not just the quality of your food, such as, whole fruits and vegetables, but the quality in terms of the exposures to pesticides, and how you can have a wonderful kale or spinach salad that is just loaded with pesticides. And we know this from the work from Environmental Working Group and their list every year called the Dirty Dozen Clean 15 that measures conventional fruits and vegetables and the level of pesticide residues as compared to organic. And it's really quite shocking, the level of chemicals that is put on food and even whole beautiful fruits and vegetables, and how we really need to think about either how to remove those chemicals from, baking soda, white vinegar, 1 part to 3 parts warm water. Certain spray washes are actually very clean and not toxic, or buying organic. Okay, so there's availability for both ways to go about this, and also frozen organic food. And I do say organic, USDA organic, that's frozen is far cheaper than fresh, often, unless it's in season. And it maintains all of its nutrient value because most of that organic frozen produce is flash frozen. So it's picked right when it comes out of the earth and it's frozen, and it maintains wonderful nutrient value, often more than fresh, which travels a great distance and can lose its nutrient value en route. Even though it has lower pesticides because it's organic, it doesn't mean that the nutrient value is up to snuff. So I encourage everyone to really buy frozen organics if they really have no access to fresh organic produce that is recently picked. Okay, so US diet, just quickly, 75% of the Western diet, which is our diet, in the United States actually consists of processed food. And this doesn't surprise me, this number. I was just in Disney, okay? And nothing could be depressing more than being at Disney and seeing sort of the choices of food that's available, and not just the choices, because there were some occasional good food choices, but people just don't choose them. So it's just really, it was a little depressing, but the way I see it is we got to keep going, because the way chronic disease is working out now in terms of obesity and heart disease, autoimmune disease, cancers, the epidemiology just shows that these are increasing, and these are conditions that certainly predispose us to worse outcomes with COVID and any other, environmental insult like a major infection. So, each person consumes 8 to 10 pounds of food additives per year, coloring, flavoring, preservatives, even chemicals used to make things crunchier and look, different types of additions. It's just a huge industry to make food look appetizing and taste appetizing. So it's something we have to think about. Let's see. This was just supermarket shopping, and I wanted to show the ingredients in, just one of the cereals I grew up on, which may explain a lot. But anyway, this is your classic American cereal that I guess international at this point, but it's just filled with junk. And, it's very appealing, and it's at eye level for kids. And it's just one of those things that pulls you in They try to say something like, natural fruit flavors, if you can see that. But look at all these chemicals that are used for coloring and preservatives. It's just remarkable, the marketing. And it's hard to believe they get away with this, but it is where we're at now. So another thing to think about is humans, when humans are nutrient sufficient, they are better equipped to handle toxin exposures. And I mentioned this with kids with their very narrow diet. It's really important to think about this because the data shows, and we have lots of this in the book and even in the textbook that Dr. Vamsal and I put together before that, that we now know that eating certain foods like green leafy vegetables that have B9, which is folate, and quercetin, which is an antioxidant, and making sure that people are iron sufficient, not iron deficient, in children actually reduces their blood lead levels. And vitamin C helps them reduce blood lead levels, which is very pervasive in our drinking water, not just in Flint, Michigan. So the idea that if we eat better with higher nutrient value, we're actually working to offset some of the problems that we can't always control. So it's just another avenue to consider when thinking about the harm that comes from environmental exposures is not just what you eat, it's also the quality of what you eat that has nutrient value to offset the stuff that you can't necessarily remove from your diet from, food choice. Now, cruciferous vegetables are a standout group because they contain several chemicals, many chemicals really, that help reduce the harm from environmental chemicals. So in other words, they have chemicals like indole 3-carbinol in broccoli, specifically. We have sulforaphane and sulfur chemicals. And they're just a remarkable group of vegetables that also help increase a second portion of conjugation in the liver, which breaks down exogenous chemicals, which is outside of the body. So these are the workhorse foods that I recommend to everybody at least once a day, twice, 3 times, 100 times a day. It's just so worth it because they do a lot of great detox for the human body in a very natural and healthy way. So of course I would say organic versions of these, or else you kind of defeat the purpose, or at least wash to remove many of the residues that come along with these very healthy produce. Again, drinking water, I put a pregnant woman here because I really want people to not forget that being pregnant means that it's a very important time to protect a fetus from things that most of us wouldn't have ever considered to be problematic. Drinking water is one of those issues that we're not really paying attention to. By volume, we consume more water than even food. We can't live without water for 3 days, but we can live without food for probably a week or 2. So the idea that by volume being 85% of our body is water, we really need to get this right. And we need to think about what is our system for drinking clean water? A lot of people say, oh, I drink bottled water because I don't trust tap water. Well, the argument with that is that bottled water often is tap water. In fact, the industry is so unregulated that 75% of water tested is often tap water, which is municipal tap, which has its problems. We're going to get into that. So again, our bodies are made up of water. We are a water species. And so we really want to make sure that we put in good water for our bodies. My father and my brother are nephrologists, and by federal mandate, I mean, it's a regulation by the FDA, they have to use reverse osmosis water for dialysis. So if we're required nationally and internationally to use reverse osmosis water, which is the most aggressive way to clean water, which we'll get into, we should really kind of consider that for everybody's use, right? It's important to remove not just bacteria and pests and infectious etiologies, which is what RO is very good for, but it also removes all these chemicals, which are even bigger compounds than even viruses. So how does water get into our home? Well, we have, municipal tap is a really important conversation. When I learned this information, I was a little dumbfounded. I couldn't believe it. We have 160,000 more or less municipal treatment plants, water treatment plants in the US. It serves about 80% of the US population. The other 20% more or less is served by well water, whether it's local or individual in the very rural places of this country. But what's interesting about municipal tap water is that it's still under the Safe Drinking Water Act. Water still follows a law, which is 50 years old, that only monitors and mandates remediation for 91 chemicals. And we have 95,000 chemicals now, at least, that are industrial chemicals used in all our products that do make their way into our drinking water. And as you can see from this image, which we trademarked and is part of our book, because we mashed up all of the important concepts here, we get a lot of different water contaminants from various sources, including manufacturing plants that dump water that's contaminated. We have runoff from pesticides, fertilizers. We have dead animals that, who knew, actually get into our water system, gasoline leaks, medications that flush down the toilet. Yes, sewage becomes our drinking water. Shocking. We also have additions to the drinking water to clean it at these treatment plants, including detergents, including chlorinated chemicals that create these volatile organic compounds that are harmful. And so the list goes on in terms of what gets into our drinking water. The problem is that, you know, these wastewater treatment plants don't remove these chemicals. They go in one side and right out the other. So let me see. So monitored, these are the things by class that are monitored in our drinking water, those 91 chemicals. Let's put it this way. Those 91 chemicals that's under the Safe Drinking Water Act, these are the groups of chemicals that's consisting of, in terms of, you know, they're looking for certain levels of E. coli when they test, either weekly, monthly, depending on the location, how many people served. They look at certain chemicals like plasticizers, radon. So these are some of the things that are looked at under those 91. Here's an example. If you were to look on the internet and just look up Safe Drinking Water Act contaminants, you'll see that this is how they list it in a nice way, where you'll see the chemical, you'll see what they consider maximum concentration level. And that's what they consider to be unsafe. Now, there's arguments as to whether or not it should be even lower. You know, who sets these standards for human health is really up for argument. We know that with lead, there's no safe level of lead, and yet there is a lead contaminant level that has been coming down over the last 3 decades in terms of what's safe. So this is kind of what you'll see, where those contaminants come from, and, you know, what they need to do to remediate. And as I mentioned before, water treatment plant, these are the types of major chemical spillage that can come off into our water. And by the way, I didn't mention coal ash from production of coal. I didn't mention fracking chemicals. We have, with climate change, much more of an increase in our flooding, which causes a whole host of problems in terms of not just wells, which overflow, but really in terms of runoff from industry. So there's just a lot ahead that we need to think about. But for now, you know, we need to understand how these water treatment plants work. And when they come out, these are all the chemicals that come out the other side, including what was added to clean the water, which again is the chlorinated chemicals to clean infectious issues or etiologies, but also the detergents as well. So as far as drinking water goes, my recommendations are always filter your water. There's a variety of ways to filter drinking water. But I do, you know, recommend people, if they want to go into a deep dive, go, you know, either read our chapter on drinking water, which is super easy and it's meant for consumers of all age groups. But then also online, there's environmental working groups filter guide. Essentially, you can use anywhere from a carbon filter or carbon block, which is pitchers or faucet, or refrigerator carbon filters, all the way up to reverse osmosis, which are now very affordable. Even for highly certified RO filters, they're $275. Some of them, and you know, cost about $150 for a plumber to put in an hour, and then it's about $40 a year to maintain those filter replacements. So to me, upfront costs and having much lower costs by not bringing in water bottles makes a lot of sense. Also carrying your water with BPA free. That doesn't mean anything. You know, plastics that say BPA free is nothing because it's just marketing junk. BPA has been replaced by PPS, BPSIP, a whole host of regrettable substitutions because they can. Once that something is removed, like Dr. Vamsal was largely responsible for having BPA removed from plastic baby bottles in 2012. But he couldn't get it out, nor could any of his colleagues in international medical journals get it out of anything else that BPA is in, which is in a lot, and including plastic water bottles still, and certainly canned foods have BPA that line the inside of all cans, even organic food cans. So, you know, another take-home message is, you know, besides plastics that you carry for water, you want to think about the plastics inside canned foods and plastics for food and storage, and try to move to glass and stainless steel. Okay, so personal care products to move quickly because I don't want to ruin our time here. Let me move faster. You know, we're sponges. That's why I put this up here. Humans are sponges. I talk about teens a lot. This was a program a little bit I gave to a high school group of parents. So I wanted people to understand that teens are growing at a different rate, their hormones certainly, and they're not just small adults. That chemicals get into, as I mentioned, on, in, and around our body, but one of the key areas is vaginal. You know, women's feminine care products, we don't think about often, but those chemicals that are in tampons and feminine care products are remarkable. I mean, antimicrobials that are endocrine disruptors, you know, fragrance perfume that is unregulated is in those, even pesticides in cotton. So we really want to think about trying to find organic brands that really are organic, since there's no mandates on that in products. This is just a great article talking about how puberty has gone down in terms of the age at which most people start puberty. Very different than several, you know, generations ago. Used to be 16, 17 when a woman got her periods, her, you know, started menarche, but it's now down to as young as 8, 9, and 10. And we now know that personal care products are a big part of this in terms of pubertal timing in both girls and boys. We know that, you know, by demographics, as I mentioned, teens use the most personal care products, teen girls more so than boys. I can vouch for that. I have 2 boys. But really, we want to think about, you know, getting this demographic to understand what they put on and around their body really does matter. You know, lipsticks. It's just a great article that shows you that no matter what fancy lipstick people buy, it may very well and very likely have heavy metals to make it bright and shiny and very colorful. This was a study that looked at 24 products out of actually 24 products, I think out of 30. It was 75% they looked at actually had elevated levels of lead, which is not regulated. Actually, it was 24 out of 32. So, you know, we now know that lead is horrible for drinking and should be not allowed, and it affects brain and neurodevelopment in children especially, but we don't think about lipstick and how many times we lick off our lipstick in a lifetime, especially as young children or teens. Adolescents, this was a study that looked at girls aged 14 to 19 that were tested 2008. They used on average 17 personal care products and found 174 unique cosmetic ingredients in their blood and urine. So what we need to think about is, what are we giving this, what are we doing to our kids? And then how to read labels to really understand, you know, ingredients. And we do a great job. And I really do say that in the book, Non-Toxic, because I use this book for high school students and it's just so understandable. So it's important for people to understand the resources are more the evergreen resources that don't change because they're run by really reputable groups, are really important, not just the products individually, because they change formulation. So I wanted to show, you know, again, educating our young people. Radiation, really big deal. We need to start thinking about how to teach kids not to put them up to their heads. We know that radiation can go deeper into the skull of a young child because their brains are not developed. Their myelin is not as thickened. Their skull is much thinner. They have much more water content. So again, holding a phone up to your ear is actually detrimental in harm in terms of the radiation connection to deeper structures, but more so in children. And certainly a bunch of ways to reduce exposure. distance is your friend. It's exponentially reduces radiation the more distance you are from your body. So there's lots of ways to reduce chemical harm. Don't buy stuff in the first place, like chemicals that are in cleaning products, particularly, which are unregulated, as well as personal care products. Survey your body, get an idea of what you put in, on, and around your body. Eat clean food and clean drinking water. Again, reverse osmosis is my choice. And I'm sure we can give access to some of the, I don't talk about brands, but there's some very good brands that are 100% made in California. So it's not hard to look this up. You don't want to buy anything overseas. Using exercise, sauna, and sweat to naturally decrease the body burden is what I recommend always. I use a sauna, and I do it once a week, and it just wonderful, feels great. I also exercise every day. Good quality and quantity of sleep. Sleep, we actually reduce chemicals overnight while we sleep. This is fabulous new data from around the world, especially China, which we've referenced in the book. Sleep is critical to removing chemicals in the spinal fluid and in the cerebral, in the brain areas as well. And it's really worth working on sleep to be part of this process. Dust regularly, as I mentioned, chemicals are heavily laden in our dust in our home. And use vetted resources, because vetted resources matter, so that they're not junk and they're not selling you a lot of lies. Get rid of stuff. I mean, I can't even tell you how much I got rid of when I started to really learn about this information. And it's cheaper. It's cheaper to not have stuff. Go back to the natural stuff. We have do-it-yourself recipes for cleaning products, personal care products, as well as resources for people who are busy to just, find things to buy online and in big box stores. So again, just remove stuff you don't need. These are my top 10 list. As I mentioned, canned foods, create a healthy water system, do a little more cleaning for dust, and don't use those wet wipes, with chemicals on them to wipe up chemicals. You want to use just water. And really take a look at your air quality. Make sure you're airing at your home, getting rid of synthetic fragrances, which are unregulated, and reducing radiation. Lifestyle, as I mentioned, diet, exercise, sleep. This is all integrative medicine. This is really just important basic stuff. Stress management as much as possible. Reduce vaping in teens, adults, smoking. Limit medications, be judicious, ask your doctors. I have a whole chapter on medications, also what to ask your doctors in terms of why you're on a drug, what its outcome's supposed to be, what your, goals are. It's just important to be judicious and understand what some of them actually do in terms of harm and other alternatives to those medicines. Supplements are also very helpful, but they have to be incredibly vetted companies because of the contamination issues. And I post on all this on the Smart Human, which I'll show you as my platform, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, as well as a podcast. Take home message: chemicals are everywhere. Radiation is a problem, but we can make a difference, and plenty of resources do actually exist that are very helpful. I say, look around, and let us not look around in anger or forward in fear, but around in awareness. It's about empowerment and educating others. This is what tonight is about. These are some of my favorite resources. They're all in the book as well. And these are the two books that Dr. Vamsal and I have put together. One's a textbook with 28 contributing authors with several 14 chapters. And then of course the book we wrote together, which is the guidebook. Very simple, very easy. And I hope people pass it around their entire family, actually. And, I didn't put in the last slide. Let me see. Well, that's okay. I wanted people to know about the Smart Human platform, which I don't think I put on this slide, but let me see. On this presentation. Anyway, the idea is that here it is. I wanted people to know the Smart Human is my baby, besides my 2 human babies and 2 fur babies. It's the one that I post Monday, Wednesday, Friday on Facebook, Twitter regularly, Instagram probably 2 or 3 times a week, different information, but more fun, a little different character to it. On the podcast, I have some brilliant people like Dr. Vamsal. I just had actress Fran Drescher, who does a lot of this work with me. But a lot of really interested researchers, environmental lawyer. So if you're interested, please take a listen to the podcast, give it a 5-star, as well as, listening on any of these platforms. Okay, so that's really it. I'm going to let Janet lead some questions. Sorry if I took too long. I think you're on. I think you're on mute, Janet. Let me stop sharing. Okay, Janet, you're still on mute. Okay, I think.
Oh, sorry. Yes, let's see. We've got at least one question so far. Michael asks, okay, I feel it's becoming common knowledge that binders such as fibers, activated charcoal, chlorella are recommended for clearing heavy metals. But if loads of chemicals are found in urine non-metal toxic chemicals test, in a urine non-metal toxic chemicals test, what are the things that can be paired with the chemicals to detox, I assume he means?
What can be used to help detox in terms of supplements?
Not clear, I guess. So he's saying, again, common knowledge now that binders, fiber, activated charcoal, chlorella, can clear heavy metals. But if loads of chemicals are found in a urine test that's a non-metal toxic chemicals test.
Oh, so in other words, right. So in other words, what can bind things other than metals?
Foods. Yeah.
Yeah. And actually probiotics, I didn't get into that. That was, I have a whole chapter on that about how probiotics are used to remediate, Superfund sites in real time, in real life. Why shouldn't we be doing that with our gut, which is essentially a Superfund site? So that can help bind metals as well as binding a lot of plastic chemicals as well, such as phthalates. So there's really new studies on that because they're now tossing in bacteria into these landfills to see how they manage those plastics. And I think that that's going to start to move, probiotics are going to be the new way we clean our gut from chemicals, if you want to look at it that way, not just leaky gut and, some of the other framing of it. But I do think that, an organic diet that's, omega-3 fish oil that's done well, not the junk that's out there, but really vetted products from very reputable companies. Omega-3s have been remarkably important for a whole host of detox mechanisms, including, protecting against Parkinson's disease, which is intimately tied not only genetically, but also to, the pesticide exposures. So omega-3s have been, we talk about that in the book, about the combination of the genetic predisposition and then how omega-3s done well can really help prevent that. So there's a lot of things that come from, say, a Mediterranean diet. If I had to argue, and it will be in the new book, one diet that's well known that can be used and has plenty of studies for helping the body help fight against chemicals, I would say Mediterranean, but the caveat, which is what I'm focusing on again, is the quality. That you can have amazing Mediterranean spread, but if it's all laden with pesticides, it sort of defeats the purpose. So being clever about that is really quite important. I also talk about, habits. A lot of people like tea and coffee in the morning, right? That's your habit. Start with cleaning up your habit. Buy loose leaf tea that's organic as opposed to tea bags that have plastics in the bag themselves and pesticides in the tea if it's not USDA organic. Use glass and stainless steel, not styrofoam, styrene, or cups that have plastic liners, such as coffee cups. So you can always tweak and improve habits, and I think that's a great place to start.
Thank you. We have a number of questions now. I wanted to ask our JCC hosts, do we have permission to go a little bit over 8:15?
Sure.
Can we do that for a little while?
Fine. Can you hear me?
Thank you. I just want to ask before I get to the next few questions, I wanted to ask a follow-up question. You mentioned about healthy gut and so on. Can you say something briefly about the impact of all these chemicals on the health of the gut microbiome, which we now realize has that the health of your gut in terms of the microbes that grow there and how they signal to other systems in the body, we now understand has a lot to do with healthy aging, good mental and physical health as we age. Could you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, and you teed that up perfectly. The gut is really the window into the body, the window into the immune system. The gut-brain connection is through the vagus nerve and the kind of the super highway between the gut, which is 24 feet of bowel, and the brain. So there's great imaging of bacteria going up and down the vagus nerve like a highway. So the gut is so vulnerable. I mean, the gut lining is literally the size in terms of thickness of half of a human hair. The surface area of the gut microbiome would cover an entire football field. It is just incredibly vulnerable, but it has been evolving for 4.5 million years with us. And that's mold and yeast and viruses and all having a great time partying together in a very balanced way. What we've done now in modern day life is we sort of knocked off good guys. We've done that through stress and changing the pH of the gut. We've done that through chlorinated drinking water and chemicals in our food. We've done that with medications, not just antibiotics. There's a whole host of medications that have been linked to lower rates, lower levels of certain healthful bacteria, which we talk about in the medications chapter. And so it's really important to realize that our gut allows things across that tube into the blood, which can piss it off and give you an immune reaction. Or it can stay very stable and strong by the foods you eat and the chemicals that you don't consume. And so the microbiome is really quite remarkable. And keeping a healthier gut as best you can by managing stress and getting rid of chlorinated drinking water and filtering your water and cleaning up your food, it all helps. And it's just very, very important to a whole host of health related conditions.
Thank you. Let's go to the next question. What do you think is the best method for filtering water? And do you have any recommendations for someone who works in an operating room to reduce their exposure to both radiation and chemical toxins in general?
Yeah, it's funny. There's in the textbook that we wrote a couple of years back, we had a whole chapter on exposures in the medical world, the medical field, how much more chemicals we're actually exposed to as healthcare workers and people involved in any aspect of hospitals, because the chemical levels are just so much greater. I will say that I'm a big fan of reverse osmosis, and I'm not afraid to shout it on mountaintops, because you don't want just any RO filter, you need it highly certified. And to go into those specifics, again, we did it in the chapter, but you can also do EWG online and try to look at that guide. I think CDC has a guide on water filters, but the idea is it has to be well certified. All parts need to be made in the US, not just say it on the box like at Home Depot and Lowe's. It has to be a company that every part, most importantly, the filter portion, has to be made in the US. I can't say brands, but I will say that the company I use is very popular, and it's 100% parts are made in California, and they're just very vetted in terms of certification. So you got to do your legwork, but they're down to $275 for a basic reverse osmosis. It's upfront costs. Plumber, RO filter, it comes with its first set of filters, so you're not paying $40 a year until the next year. But to me, they are the best option we have. They're not perfect, and I found that out. I did my own testing in my house against, there's a testing kit called Simple Tap Score. I think it's just came out, and I was trying to get an idea of how well my RO filter was working, since I, recommend it to patients and stuff. And it turns out it did very well, but there are always going to be issues within your locale that it can't handle 100%.
Thanks a lot. There's another question on the RO filters. Barbara asks, please discuss the problem of fluoride in the water, and will an RO filter get it out?
So interestingly enough, RO filters do a very good job for the most part, far better than many carbon filters, which are the pitchers. There's a head-to-head pitcher evaluation by a group called Modern Castle on YouTube. I think it's like 1 million views. And I thought it was interesting because it's one group called, I think it's called Modern Castle. And they did a 15-minute video showing different pitcher filters and how much they work against, various contaminants, including chlorine and fluoride. So it's worth watching. I found it very interesting, but those are the pitcher filters. And I asked if they were ever going to do, RO filters. And they said they couldn't get into it yet because they have to pay for them because they buy everything so they don't get biased, which I thought was a very good answer. But anyway, I do recommend RO filters. What was the second part of the question? I'm so old.
It was about fluoride. And
yeah.
Can you summarize what the issues are about fluoride? Many of us grew up believing that fluoride had to be in our drinking water for dental health. What's the latest thinking about that? And can these RO filters remove fluoride?
Yeah, RO can do that. And like I said, that's worth asking the manufacturer and doing your research, but they can certainly do fluoride. The smallest particulate matter is viruses. And that's what RO does. It's the material is so, the pore size is so small that it gets after the viruses. So anything bigger than that, including fluoride, is often taken off with it. So it's the baby in the bathwater. Yes, you need to remove everything, including minerals. I'll get to that question right now. And that's what you have to do in order, because the RO filter doesn't know good particles from bad particles, healthy from bad. So everything comes off, and then you drink your RO water with a nice big salad, and then you'll get your minerals back. But the idea is there's just no way to take just intricate, choice between minerals and harmful stuff. Fluoride is considered a toxin, a neurotoxin, that has been well described amongst many researchers internationally. There's questions of whether it reduces IQ in pregnant women who give birth to children. And this has been followed out in Canadian studies. Grandjean is one of the famous researchers that came up with a wonderful study looking retrospectively at many, many studies and put that information together, which is in our book. But the idea is that fluoride has been removed now from so many water systems around the world. The US has not done so. It's just a shame, but we now know that there's just no good reason to drink fluoride. If you want to use fluoride topically on your children's teeth, which is what we do, and did, that's fine, but we did not make them or have them ingest fluoride.
Thank you. Let's move on. Someone asked, what about whole food, plant-based versus Mediterranean diet?
I don't see much of a difference in some ways. I mean, Mediterranean has great fatty acids, from omegas that are done well, if you can do them well. I do like, again, quality is going to be my shtick. Moving forward, it's really something people don't get or don't understand or don't know about. But quality makes a lot of difference, even in the macros that we choose between plants or meat or fish or grains or no grains. It's the quality that's really going to rise to the surface now as a big issue, in my opinion. I like plant-based. I'm plant-based, but I have high quality chicken, fish, turkey, wild caught, no nitrates, shrimp from the Keys that are frozen and inexpensive, but no chemicals. I rarely have beef. If I do, it's going to be a killer steakhouse that I just love, my filet mignon, but it's rare that I get it. Not rare that I eat rare food, but it's rare that I get it, and I don't miss it. So I think it's better for the planet, and I think it's probably better for my body, as we now know from the literature.
As we all know, some of these choices might be difficult for, let's say, people who aren't so affluent. That's a whole nother discussion.
Sure.
But moving on to another question from the audience, Lucia asked, what do you think about vaccines? I guess she means also the COVID vaccine.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, that's a huge question. I'm a rheumatologist. I believe in important studies. I believe in vaccines. I believe they've done far more good for human health than any problems, even though there have been problems legitimately with vaccine testing over the, over human experience. I believe I was first in line to get the COVID vaccine. I cried the whole way there that I got the golden ticket. So if you want to know my opinion, I think they have to each be individually evaluated for their benefits and their risks. I think the fact that people were dying and we now have 1 million people dead from COVID should tell us something also. But at the time we didn't know that, it was just getting worse. I do believe in vaccines as a general rule. I do believe there are some exceptions. I see patients that can't get the vaccine, and I wouldn't recommend it, but very few and far between.
Thank you. Michael asks, for those that are considering conceiving a child, could you talk about the timeline of how many weeks, months, years in advance it's recommended to begin the various types of detoxes, and within what window of time would be unsafe to have the chemicals leach out and possibly retox? And could you say a little bit about detoxing? We've talked about the good foods to eat. You've talked about sauna, sweating as a way to get chemicals out.
Yeah.
Do you believe that, along with this question, do you believe that most people can DIY detox pretty well unless they have a very particular problem? Or do you advise that people go to a practitioner to have chelation or some fancy kind of detox? What do you think?
Yeah, it's an individual basis because, just the system is set up. Chelation is very costly. It really should be used only in specific cases where there are clinical findings that are matched to laboratory findings. It can strip also very important nutrients because chelation is not specific just to certain metals. We need copper, we need zinc, we need certain things that make our bodies thrive. And when you take iron is a metal. So we need to really rethink the idea of a practitioner that needs to do that specifically unless it's really clinically warranted. Okay. And that takes a really good screening process. That takes a good practitioner. So I'm all for going to healthy doctors integrative doctors who really are well-trained. I don't mind functional as long as they're well-trained and they don't go overboard because that's a big risk. But with testing, but I would say that, there's so much we can do that I put in the book, a whole chapter on detox that has nothing to do with money. It's more about behavior and sleep and understanding that our evolution and our anthropology has set us up to do much more for ourselves than we give it credit for.
Thank you. And could you please, I know I added another question for you, but Michael's question about the timeline of weeks, months, years in advance to detox, if you're planning to become pregnant, how to balance that, how to handle that.
So boy, do I regret eating the McDonald's that I was eating in my pregnancy. I really want people to realize that it's never too late to just get a clean and healthy diet. When we start putting parameters on detoxing prior to pregnancy, I think it freaks people out and gets them stressed that, if they didn't start this time or that time. But let's put it this way, first trimester is a very critical point of development. And we talk about this. We have a whole chapter on sort of exposure windows and, how to start thinking about getting pregnant and when to get pregnant. Look, a year in advance would be fabulous if people had the freedom and the finances to really start thinking about their body. But I look at it like everyone, no matter whether you're getting pregnant or not, should be doing this. I don't look at it as just a pregnancy issue, although of course that's concerning. We all want healthy kids. We know autism is skyrocketed. We know that, phthalates affect kids, genitalia and boys in particular. We have to really think about this in advance, but I don't want to ever make my patients or my audience think that they did anything wrong. And it's about empowerment and getting on it and doing as much as you can within reason as soon as you really decide that's something you want.
Thank you. Judy asks, are any probiotics better than others?
Interesting. It's a huge market now. I believe the companies matter. I'll give an example. So there are a lot of companies that you walk into big box stores and just want to take off the shelf. Well, I have a question. Did they travel to that CVS or Walgreens in a refrigerated truck? Were they sitting in Texas at 110-degree weather before they made it to your, local CVS? So when I get my probiotics shipped to me, which by the way, they're shelf stable, they do not have to be refrigerated, which I find immensely helpful in terms of, compliance with myself and my patients. But my particular probiotics, if they come to my home warm or frozen, I send them back. And I manage the temperature changes in Tennessee where the FedEx depot is before it comes up to New Jersey. So I'm watching the temperature. I'm having it triple packed with ice. I'm looking to when I buy them, in which season. Really, it's not just the quality of the brand, which in and of itself, you want at least 20 to 30 billion for someone who has no GI issues. And you want diversity on that label, but you need a good brand. The brands matter. They've been meticulously vetted. People compare them. So you want to look into the brand. And there's several very good ones, but you also want to know, how did they get to where you bought them? Because they could be dead and worthless.
It's a lot to keep up with. Zara asks, what few changes would you most recommend for the parent of a young child? Sometimes it feels as though just about everything is toxic.
Oh, I hear you. And I have teenagers and they refuse to listen to me. So you wouldn't believe the junk that my own kids actually eat and we cave in for. So it's not a perfect system, even for someone who does this for a living. I show them my books and they don't care. But I will say to you this, start with low-hanging fruit. Start with things that the child can't bitch and moan about. In other words, take away fragrances, take away cleaning products that are junky. Go with all natural white vinegar and, sea salt for scrubbing and real lemon juice, and start with the stuff that affects them from an air quality perspective. And then layer in things that a child likes, just a healthier version. We used to get M&Ms from, Whole Foods that were as similar to regular M&Ms as you can find. So there's swaps that are out there, and you just have to sort of sneak them in. And once they become more, the culture of your home, you won't find trouble as much, but I still contend with it. So good luck.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. From your chart about the most dangerous periods in our lives, can those of us way past these stages relax a little bit? I've been following almost all of this for many years and have no significant illness. If that's encouraging to others, what are your preferred? So can older people relax a little bit? Should we keep up the vigilance? What do the data show? And also the same individual asked, what are your preferred sources of probiotics? I think you've somewhat answered that. And are fermented foods a form of probiotics? But mostly, please tell us about, can some of us relax about?
Listen, I try to be, very realistic. I've come full circle from, oh my God, on the ledge, freaking out, to, what, we're all in this boat together. We all have to live our lives. My kids play soccer on soccer turf. There's a whole section in this book about soccer turf and sports turf, because it mattered to me, even mouth guards, which mouth guard, and what do I do if they're on synthetic turf versus regular turf? And I wanted people to see things through my eyes as a mom and as a practitioner and someone who knew too much. But I would say to you, it's a balance. And what you want to do is hit the low hanging fruit, the high yield information and materials to swap out. I think water, top of my list now. I mean, it never was, but now I know too much. So I want everyone to have a water system where they get it 80% right, and maybe 20% is restaurants and travel, who cares? But I think that's a big one that we can all do, and pretty easy to do financially. If we're spending money on things like, cell phones and hair and nails, we should be thinking about what we're doing with our water system. Older people, listen, I think that what we do is a faith. We don't know for sure what we're going to get, but whatever you do, you're hoping to stave off those illnesses and compress them to the very end of your life. And that is all of our goals, is to live healthy to the very last minute when we require all the junk, and I think that just being moderate and reasonable, and, I take vitamins that are, appropriate to what my issues are. I do those things because I believe and have a faith that not just the science, but the faith. And I think that's important, because you have to be committed, and it's work to be healthy. It really is. So I don't know if I've helped anyone with that answer, but I can say that you can't go nuts. You have to live a balanced life, but what you do is you set it up so you succeed.
That's a great answer, a great final message. I don't know if Caroline or Nancy would like to close out the session. Thank you all very much. I think I'm getting an echo here. I'm not sure why, but
please follow
everybody attending and all your questions.
Can I make one request?
Sure.
If everyone can follow on the Smart Human, I'd really appreciate it, on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and all the above, but also invite people, invite friends on Facebook to like the page. It's almost at 50,000. I think I need 70 more people, but the idea is that it grows, it builds, and it shows grant writers when I try to get programs started that this is wanted and it's valuable. People are interested. So it all helps, and I sell nothing.
So I want to thank Janet for inviting and hosting this hour and a half with, now am I going to say it right? Dr. Cohen.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. And what occurs to me is that we just need to have you back, both of you, right? There's just more questions to answer, and this is something that we need to learn to live, right? It's not like a one and done. Right. And so I'm like even thinking, okay, how do I wash my vegetables? Right.
Yeah.
And I love that you gave some answers to that. And so I'd love to have you back.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It really is. And thank you so much for having me. And just wonderful, Janet. Thank you for teeing everything up so beautifully.
Yeah, and I want to put a
Great.
little plug in for our teens. I think talking to our teens and our teen moms would be really another way to.
It all matters. It just has to be,
Yeah,
done in very. That's why the book was made to be a guide. It's not supposed to
Really
ambush.
terrific book.
It's supposed to be a guide. And that's why the flavor is empowerment. It's a journey.
You know, and I'm also fascinated with what, how your intersection between sort of arthritis and rheumatology and all that kind of stuff and how that impacts that. So that I'd really
Next
love
book.
to have. Yeah,
That's
I know.
the next
That
book.
I'd love
That's
to have a
tying
conversation.
development to our epidemiology of immune system disorders. That's the next book.
Awesome. Great. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much
Thank
for joining us tonight. Be safe, be well, and we will see you again next time.